Somewhere in West Texas, the land goes so flat and so dry that the sky feels like a lid pressed down hard on everything underneath it. Miles of pale grass, miles of dust. A ranch sitting low on the horizon like it's been there long enough to forget it had a choice. Inside that ranch, a kitchen, cold stove, spoiled bacon. The particular silence of a place that has been losing something for a long time and has run out of ways to say so. And then, a woman steps through the door, wide through the shoulders, steady in her eyes. The kind of woman that rooms have always looked past on their way to something else. She looks at the mess. She looks at the land outside the window. She rolls up her sleeves. Nobody in that county knew her name yet. Nobody knew what she was about to find buried underneath the ground they'd been standing on for 40 years. And somewhere down the road, a man in a clean hat is already driving toward this ranch. He's been planning this for months. She just arrived this morning. The summer her father died, Eliza Hart learned two things. The first, a man of God could run out of miracles just like anyone else. The second, grief smells like wet soil and old wood and candle wax that burned all night for nothing. She stood at the grave in her best black dress, the one with the mended hem, the one her father never noticed was mended because he never looked down. He was always looking up, always looking towards something Eliza could not quite see. The Missouri sky that morning was the color of a bruise, purple and yellow and aching all the way to the horizon. The other mourners said kind things, words like faithful servant and good man and better place. Eliza nodded at every single one. She did not believe a single one. Not because her father wasn't good, he was. He was the best man she had ever known, which made the whole thing worse. Which made the empty pew and the silent pulpit and the cold stove and the stack of debt notices on the kitchen table feel like some kind of cosmic joke she didn't find funny. He left her a Bible, a cracked china teacup, and $43 of other people's money that she did not have. That was the inheritance of Eliza Hart, 19 years old, daughter of a preacher, keeper of nothing. Aunt Miriam arrived 3 days later with a carpet bag and an opinion about everything. She was her father's older sister, sturdy, practical, the kind of woman who viewed sentiment the same way she viewed mud on the kitchen floor. Something to be dealt with efficiently and not discussed. She sat Eliza down at the kitchen table, set a cup of tea in front of her, then set a newspaper beside the tea. The Missouri Matrimonial Gazette. Eliza looked at it the way you look at a snake you're not sure is dead yet. "I've circled the reasonable ones," Miriam said, pulling out a chair with the authority of a woman who had already made the decision and was simply waiting for Eliza to catch up. 3 notices, red pencil, neat circles. Eliza read them slowly. Widower, 44, cattle ranch. Wants motherly woman for children. She was 19. She was not a motherly woman. She was barely a woman, full stop. Merchant, 51, requires obedient wife. References preferred. References for a wife. She set that one aside without a word. And the third, honest man, 32, seeks God-fearing bride to share ranching life in Arizona territory. Faith and fortitude required. Write to Thomas Chase, San Cristo. Eliza read it twice, then a third time. Honest. She liked that word. Not successful, not established, not prominent. Just honest. Arizona territory, she said. It's far, Miriam agreed, but far isn't the worst thing. Far isn't the worst thing. Eliza looked out the window at the gray street and the gray sky and the gray future she could already see assembling itself without her permission. A life that had already decided what shape it was going to be. She wrote the letter that night, her best handwriting, careful and steady. She said she was the daughter of a minister, that she had faith and some fortitude, and she was willing to find out if she had more. That she could cook and read and keep accounts. That she was not afraid of hard work. She did not say she was afraid of other things. Loneliness, smallness, a life that happened to her instead of one she chose. She sealed the letter, posted it the next morning, and then she waited. A fortnight later, a sealed envelope arrived with her name on the front in steady, careful script. Inside, train tickets, a silver ring, plain and thin, and a letter, Miss Hart. I received your letter with gratitude. I am a man of my word, and I will honor what I have promised. I will meet you at the San Cristo station. Come prepared for a different kind of life, but not an unkind one. Thomas Chase, not an unkind one. She read that line 4 times. Then she packed her carpet bag, her father's Bible, the cracked china teacup wrapped in a wool stocking, 3 dresses, 2 pairs of gloves. Aunt Miriam watched from the doorway, did not hug her. just pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand at the last moment. "Read it when you need it," she said, "not before." Eliza tucked it into the front pages of the Bible without looking at it. She would forget it was there for a very long time. But it would find her again when the moment was right. Things her father had loved always did. The train west left on a Tuesday. And if you have never taken a 6-day train journey alone at the age of 19 into a territory you have never seen, toward a man whose face you do not know, then you cannot fully appreciate what it does to a person. The first day was fine, almost exciting. Green fields rolling past the windows, a woman with a baby who cried in shifts, 2 men playing cards who argued quietly about something. Eliza couldn't hear. A conductor who called out station names like he was reading from scripture. The second day, the green started thinning. The third day, gone entirely. By the fourth day, the land outside the window was something else. Red rock, endless sky, flat earth that stretched to the edge of the world and then seemed to stretch further still. She had never seen so much nothing. She had never felt so small inside so much space. She read her Bible. She watched the landscape shift and burn and dry. She imagined Thomas Chase. In her imagination, he was fair-haired, sun-browned in the gentle way of a man who worked outdoors and didn't complain about it. The kind of man who fixed fences without being asked and said grace before meals, and maybe, on a good evening, read aloud from something worthwhile. Steady. That was the word she kept returning to. Steady. She pictured his hands. Probably calloused. Probably large. Probably good at things she didn't know how to name yet. She pictured his eyes. Kind. Definitely kind. She did not let herself imagine anything else. She was practical. She was the daughter of a preacher. She had faith and some fortitude, and she was going to be fine. She told herself this approximately 47 times between Missouri and Arizona. The 5th day brought mountains she had no names for. The 6th brought desert so absolute it seemed like the land itself had made a final decision about what it wanted to be, and had stopped apologizing for it. She watched it out the window and felt something in her chest she couldn't quite identify. Not fear, not excitement. Something between the two that had no word. She thought, whatever that man is, whatever that life turns out to be, I have already come too far to be the same person who got on this train. She didn't know how right she was. The San Cristo station was smaller than she expected. The train hissed and slowed and groaned to a stop in a cloud of steam and red dust, and Eliza gathered her bag and stepped down onto the platform. And the heat hit her like something deliberate. Not like Missouri heat. Missouri heat was damp and heavy and clung to you like a damp cloth that had been used too many times. This heat was dry, insistent. The kind that reaches right through your dress and your skin and reminds you that you are mostly water, and the land around you is mostly not. She squinted against the light. She looked up and down the platform. Men, a few women, children running between legs. 2 men loading flour sacks onto a cart. An old dog sleeping in a thin stripe of shadow as if the shadow were the only thing keeping him alive. No fair-haired steady man looking for a bride. She stood there with her carpetbag and her father's Bible and her silver ring on her left hand, and she waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. He's coming, she told herself. He's probably just late. Probably the road from the ranch takes longer than expected. Probably. Miss Hart? She turned. Sheriff Wade Briggs was not what she expected either. He was broad and weathered and had the look of a man who had seen too much of the world and had made a private agreement with himself to keep seeing it anyway. He held his hat in both hands. His knuckles were thick. His eyes were careful in the way of someone who had learned caution the expensive way. I am, she said. He nodded, looked at her for a long moment in a way that was not unkind but was very specific, like he was measuring something, like he was deciding how much of a thing to say. There's a man waiting for you, he said, outside of town. He sent the boy with the wagon. He paused, his hat making a slow rotation in his hands. I need to tell you something before you go. Eliza's stomach did a small, controlled thing. Not quite a drop. More of a shift in ballast. Tell me, she said. He turned the hat once more. Twice, a man buying himself a moment he hadn't quite planned for. Thomas Chase is a good man, he said. By everything I know of him, which is more than most around here. He's fair in trade. He keeps his word. He's never given me cause for trouble. Another pause. Longer this time. But he's not what most folks around here would call a settler. The controlled thing in her stomach became considerably less controlled. What is he, she asked. The sheriff looked at her with those careful eyes. "You'll see," he said. Those 2 words. She would think about them for a long time afterward. The way they neither warned her nor prepared her. The way they were honest without being kind, which was its own particular kind of honesty. The wagon was driven by a boy of maybe 12, Apache, black hair tied back with a strip of leather. Dark eyes that assessed her once with complete efficiency, determined she was not a threat, and returned to the horses. He did not speak. She did not ask him to. They rode out of San Cristo and into the desert. The town faded behind them and was replaced by rock and sky, and cactus standing in the heat like old soldiers who had forgotten what they were guarding. The silence that replaced the town sounds was unlike anything Missouri had given her. Missouri was never silent. Always a creek, or a wind through elm trees, or someone's dog 2 properties over, or the distant bell of the church on the hour, or her father's voice reading scripture, even when he thought no one was listening. This silence was different in kind, not just degree. It had weight. It had texture. It pressed against her ears in a way that was almost physical, like the desert was saying, "Here, you will have to bring your own noise, or learn to do without." After a long time, a very long time, she saw smoke. Thin and gray against the reddening afternoon sky, rising from somewhere below a canyon rim she hadn't noticed until the wagon was nearly upon it. And then, as the wagon tipped down toward the valley floor, she saw the lodges rounded, low, a dozen of them in a loose cluster near a narrow creek that caught the last light. Fires between them sending up small columns of smoke. Children running among the structures, barefoot and unaware they were being observed. Dogs sleeping. Horses tethered in groups, their tails moving slow against the flies. Women moving with the easy efficiency of people who had done the same work in the same place for a very long time and had stopped noticing the effort of it. Eliza Hart of Missouri sat very still in that wagon and felt the entire shape of her future rearrange itself without asking her permission. Apache. The word arrived in her mind the way words do when they carry more weight than their letters. She knew what she had heard about Apache people. Not much, and what she had heard was wrong. She would understand that later. Right now, she only knew the word and the weight and the fear that arrived alongside both. The boy stopped the wagon. She did not move, and then a man stepped out from between 2 lodges and walked toward the wagon, and Eliza understood in one long, terrible, clarifying moment that this was Thomas Chase. Not fair-haired, not sun-browned in the way she had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from actual work rather than any particular effort toward it. Long dark hair bound with copper-colored beads that caught the last gold of the setting sun. A scar ran down his left cheek, old and pale, the kind a man carries so long he has stopped being aware of it. He wore a plain dark shirt and simple trousers, nothing she expected, nothing at all. His eyes. She noticed his eyes before everything else, and she would notice them for a long time to come. Dark gray. The color of the sky in the hour before a serious storm decides to arrive. And in them was something she had not expected to find in any eyes at this particular moment. Not triumph, not cruelty, not the cold assessment of a man looking at something he has acquired. Steadiness. He stopped a few feet from the wagon. He did not reach up to help her down. He just looked at her with those storm gray eyes, waiting. "You are Eliza Hart," he said. Not a question, a recognition. "I am," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She was privately proud of that. For approximately 2 seconds. "I know this is not what your letter prepared you for," he said. She climbed down from the wagon without his help, because her legs needed to be on solid ground, because she needed to be standing at her full height when she said what she was about to say. "You are Apache," she said. "Yes, your notice did not say that, no." A pause, clean and undefensive. It did not. She looked at him. He looked at her. Somewhere behind her, a child laughed at something, and a dog made a comment about it, and the fire crackled in that particular way fires have of being indifferent to human drama. The desert wind moved through the canyon walls in a low sound like breathing. "Then explain to me," she said, each word placed carefully. "Why I am here," he explained. Not quickly, not with apology. Calmly, in the manner of a man who has thought about something for a long time and has decided the truth is the only version worth the breath it takes to say it. There was a peace treaty. 2 years of negotiation between his people and the territorial government. 2 years of careful movement towards something that might, if it held through enough seasons, keep men alive, on both sides of a line drawn by people who had never walked the land they were drawing on. The treaty had conditions. One of them, a condition proposed by the federal representative and agreed to before Chase fully understood what it would cost him, personally, required a white witness, a woman of good standing, someone who would live among the Apache band and testify, if testimony was ever required, that the terms were being honored, that the people were not a threat, that the land they occupied was occupied in peace. A wife, in the legal sense the government would recognize. They needed a human document, he said, a living piece of evidence. Eliza stared at him. A living piece of evidence. She had been called many things in 19 years. That was not among them. And if I refuse, she said, the treaty breaks. He said it without drama, the way you state a fact about weather or distance. My people lose the protection the agreement provides. The territorial army has been waiting for cause to move. They will not need a good one. She looked past him at the lodges, at the fire, at a little girl of perhaps 5 who had stopped running to stare at Eliza with enormous dark eyes, and then disappeared behind her mother's skirts. And what do I lose? Eliza said. It came out more as an observation than a question. Chase looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind those gray eyes, something she couldn't read yet. The choice, he said, is yours. I will not force you. But I want you to understand what the choice carries before you make it. She stood in the desert in her traveling dress with her carpetbag at her feet, and the last sun burning everything the color of old gold. And she thought about her father's voice reading from the Psalms on Sunday mornings when the church was full, and again on Tuesday evenings when it wasn't. She thought about the $43 she didn't have. She thought about Aunt Miriam and the kitchen table and the practical solution to the problem of being 19 and alone. Then she looked at this man, this steady, scarred, gray-eyed man who had told her the truth when he could have told her anything else, when he could have sent someone more comfortable to meet her, when he could have dressed differently or hidden things until the paperwork was signed. He hadn't. She picked up her carpetbag. Show me where I'm to sleep, she said. The ceremony was the following morning. Simple, brief. The elders spoke words in Apache that she didn't understand, their voices low and rhythmic, carrying weight she could feel without comprehending. Sheriff Briggs rode out from San Cristo to serve as the legal witness, looking like a man who had been asked to do something quite unusual and had decided after some internal deliberation that it was probably fine. A younger Apache man stood on Chase's other side and watched Eliza throughout with an expression she couldn't fully read. Suspicion, maybe, or something one step short of it. She would learn later that this was Reed, Chase's younger brother, 26 years old. A warrior in the particular way young men become warriors when they have something real to protect and have watched it nearly taken from them before. He wore his distrust openly and without apology, which she would eventually come to respect more than she expected. At least with Reed, she always knew precisely where she stood. The elders finished. Sheriff Briggs signed the document that made the thing legal in the eyes of the territory. Chase turned to Eliza. He held out a small wooden box. She took it from him. It fit in both her hands with a little room. Carved on the lid was a pattern of lines and angles she didn't recognize. A bird, perhaps, or the suggestion of one. The geometry of flight abstracted into something older. The weight of it was strange. Not heavy exactly, substantial. Like it contained something that had gravity, even though it didn't have obvious mass. Your wedding gift, Chase said. Open it when your heart is ready. She looked up at him. When will I know my heart is ready? The faintest curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The beginning of one, held back. You'll know, he said. Then he turned and walked back toward the camp, and she stood holding a box she didn't understand yet, watching a man she had just married walk away, and the desert wind moved through the canyon and carried with it a smell she had no name for. Something old, something dry and mineral and alive beneath the surface. She would learn its name later. She would learn a great many things. The first days were the hardest, not because anyone was cruel to her. Nobody was cruel, but loneliness in a crowd of strangers is its own specific kind of pain, separate from loneliness in an empty room. She didn't know the language. She didn't know the rhythms of the camp. When to be where, what to do with her hands, how to be useful in a place that had been working perfectly well without her. She made mistakes, small ones that felt enormous in the moment. She stepped in the wrong direction during the morning fire building, and nearly knocked over a clay pot that an older woman had been heating for the better part of an hour. The woman said nothing, just gave her a look, the particular look of a woman who has been patient about too many things for too many years to spend any of her remaining patience on one more. This is fine, Eliza told herself. You've handled hard things before. Except she hadn't actually. She had handled difficult things. There was a difference. The desert was teaching it to her daily. The woman who found her in those first days was not who she expected. She was small, wrinkled in the deep layered way of very old trees, where each ring tells something about the years. Her hair was white and long, and she wore it loose in the evenings. Her name, as Eliza slowly understood it, translated roughly to Silver Fox, and Eliza would never hear anyone address her as anything else. She was the spiritual elder of the band, the keeper of old stories. The one who interpreted what couldn't be measured and made the final determination about things that lived outside the reach of practical calculation. She appeared outside Eliza's lodge on the third night. No knock, no announcement. Just there, when Eliza pushed back the high door at the sound of footsteps. Silver Fox stood with a bowl of warm corn mash in both hands, steam rising slow in the cool night air. Eliza took it without speaking. Silver Fox sat down on the ground outside the lodge entrance without being invited. The way a woman sits when she has decided a place is worth sitting and doesn't require anyone's permission to do so. She looked at the fire, not at Eliza. Eliza sat down too. They ate nothing together because Eliza was the only one eating, and they said nothing together, and somehow the silence was different from all the other silences she had encountered in those first days. It had company in it. It had intention. After a long time, Silver Fox said, in English that was halting and precisely chosen, gathered from years of patient listening at the edges of worlds, "He never give box to anyone." Eliza stopped chewing. "The box?" she said. Silver Fox nodded once, then rose with the ease of someone whose body remembered how to move even when the years suggested otherwise, and walked away into the dark without looking back. Eliza sat alone with the empty bowl and the fire, and the wooden box sitting on the ground just inside her lodge, and she thought about that for a very long time. He never gave the box to anyone. What did that mean about the man who had given it to her? What did it mean about the box? What did it mean about her being here at all? She didn't have answers. But the questions had changed shape. They were less frightening now and more interesting, which was its own kind of progress. Chase taught her words every evening. After the day's work, which was considerable, and before the full dark which came fast and absolute in the desert, he would sit across from her and say a word in Apache and wait. She would try it, mangle it, try again. He never corrected her with impatience. He simply waited with the specific quality of stillness that she was beginning to understand. Was not coldness but concentration. Water, sun, fire, stone, morning, walk, sit, thank you, listen. She repeated them back. Badly at first, then less badly. One evening she attempted thank you and got the tone entirely wrong, and it came out as something else completely, because Reed, passing behind them, stopped dead in his tracks and looked at her with an expression caught precisely between horror and a reluctant desire to laugh. She looked at Chase. "What did I say?" He pressed his lips together in the particular way of someone preventing an expression from escaping. Something about a goat, and its opinion of the weather. She stared at him, and then something happened that surprised her completely. She laughed, real laughter startled out of her without permission, and he laughed too, quiet and low. A sound she hadn't heard from him before, warmer than anything else about him. Reed stood behind them looking at both of them like they had taken leave of their senses, which perhaps they had a little. It was the first time in those weeks that she felt, for one brief unguarded moment, exactly like herself. He told her about his mother on an evening she didn't realize was a Thursday until she thought about it later. They were by the fire. The camp was quiet in that particular way that follows the end of a day's work. A half moon hung low over the eastern canyon rim, still pale against the darkening sky. He was mending a piece of tack leather with the neat, unhurried movements of a man who has done a task so many times it no longer requires thought. She was failing to do something useful with the mending she'd been given and had stopped pretending otherwise. "You speak English like someone who was taught properly," she said. "Who taught you?" He didn't look up from the leather. "A missionary, when I was young, a decent man. He taught me English and some Latin, and said that words could build bridges if you used them carefully." A pause. He believed that very sincerely. What happened to him? He left. Before things became difficult, he looked at the fire. Before his people and my people stopped being able to speak to each other across the things that had happened. She watched him. Do you believe they can still speak to each other after everything? I'm speaking to you, he said. Matter of fact. No sentiment attached. She looked at the fire. Your mother, she said after a moment. You mentioned her once before the ceremony. She was white? He set down the leather. It was the first time she had seen him stop working without a specific external reason. She came from a settlement near Tucson, he said. She was very young when she was taken. I will not pretend that was not what it was. He said it without apology, but also without pride. Just the weight of a fact that had been carried a long time. But she stayed. When she could have left, she stayed. When my father died, she stayed. When her own people sent word that they would take her back if she wanted to come, she stayed. He was quiet for a moment. She died here, in this canyon. The people called her Running Water Woman, not her birth name. The name they gave her because she moved through the camp the way water moves through stone, finding the spaces, making things grow where nothing grew before. Eliza was quiet for a moment. And your name, she said. Chase. Chase, that's your white name. Thomas was the missionary's name. Chase was my mother's family name. I use it for trade, for legal documents, for men like the sheriff who need a name they can write in a ledger. He looked at her. My name among my people is Natan Sombra. What does it mean? Shadow who leads. She tried it quietly. Natan Sombra. He looked at her in a way she didn't have words for yet. You said it correctly. She had said it exactly as he said it. She had been listening carefully. She thought she might always listen carefully to him. The rattlesnake appeared on a Tuesday. She was fairly certain of the day this time because the supply man came on Tuesdays, and she had seen him that morning in town. She had gone to the narrow creek to fetch water, and which was her job now, one of several she had acquired over the weeks through the simple process of watching what needed doing and positioning herself to do it. She was good at that. Her father's daughter, and her father had spent his life watching what needed doing. The rattlesnake was coiled on the flat rock beside the water, diamondback, thick, the tail already moving in that dry, specific percussion that meant exactly one thing. She froze. Don't move. Even Missouri had snakes. Even Missouri had that basic instruction. So she didn't. She stood with the clay jug in her hands and the snake between her and the water, and her heart doing something loud and irregular in her chest and the sweat already on her back from the morning heat, and then, a blur from her left, a knife. One motion, clean as a sentence with nothing wasted. The snake went still. Chase stood between her and the rock. His breathing was only slightly faster than normal. The knife already being resheathed with the practiced efficiency of a man for whom this kind of motion is ordinary. He turned. Something was happening in his face that she hadn't catalogued yet. Not concern exactly. Something more urgent than concern and less complicated than fear. Always look where you step, he said, low, direct, almost rough with it. She nodded. She was shaking slightly, the way the body shakes when danger is over and it hasn't received the message yet. You're all right, he said. Not quite a question. Yes, she said. Thank you. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he picked up the clay jug, filled it at the creek, and handed it back to her and walked toward the camp without looking back. That night she had the fever. She didn't know when it started. She went to sleep feeling strange and warm and woke at some hour, Peel she couldn't identify, to find the dark of the lodge pressing close, and her body convinced it was somewhere much hotter than Arizona. She was dimly aware between long stretches of thick dark nothing of someone beside her. A damp cloth, cool water pressed to her lips. A voice, low, saying words in a language she couldn't follow, and she didn't need to follow them, because the sound of them was enough. Steady, unhurried, present. She woke properly at dawn. The fire outside was already lit. The camp was beginning its day with the sounds she had come to recognize. And Chase was sitting against the far wall of her lodge. Not asleep, just sitting, with his back straight and his hands resting on his knees, and his eyes came to her the moment she stirred. You should drink, he said. He poured water from a clay jug. You sat here all night, she said. He brought her the water. Did not answer. You sat here all night, she said again, slower. You were under my protection, he said. That is not a word I use carelessly. She took the water. Her hands were steadier than she expected. She looked at him in the early morning light, with the fire outside making a pale glow through the lodge walls, and she saw things she had been too afraid, or too proud, or too stubborn to notice before. The lines at the corners of his eyes that came from years of looking at distances. The careful way he held himself, always slightly braced. The posture of a man who has learned that rest can be interrupted. The permanent slight tension along his jaw of someone who carries weight without speaking about what it costs him. "Thank you," she said, "for the snake, for last night. For being honest with me at the beginning, when you didn't have to be." He looked at her for a long moment. "Rest," he said. He walked out. She sat with the water and the morning light and the wooden box on the ground beside her sleeping mat, and she thought, "I have not opened it. I still don't know what's inside, and I'm not sure I want to open it yet." Which is strange. Which is very strange, because 3 weeks ago, I wanted nothing more than to understand everything about this place. Maybe understanding isn't the first thing you need. Maybe the first thing you need is to stop being afraid long enough to look clearly. She wasn't entirely sure that had happened yet, but it was closer than before. Something in her chest had opened the smallest amount, the way a window opens in a room that has been closed too long. And the air coming in was unfamiliar, but it was air. 3 weeks in, she could grind corn. Not well, not quickly, but consistently without disaster. She could start a fire in the desert manner, which was different from the Missouri manner, and had taken her an embarrassingly long time to learn. She could say approximately 40 words in Apache, and use 15 of them correctly in context. She knew which plants near the creek were edible, and which would make you wish you were only mildly ill. She knew too that Silver Fox's silence was not distance, but the specific piece of someone who had said enough words across a long life, and now chose each remaining one with care. She knew that Reed's scowl was his face's resting expression, and did not mean he wanted her gone, only that he was still deciding what he wanted. She knew that Chase woke before anyone else, and walked the canyon rim alone each morning before the camp rose, and that this was not loneliness, but something closer to prayer, which she recognized because her father had done the same thing, just with different words and different terrain. She did not know that she had stopped counting the days until she tried to count them and couldn't. She thought, "Oh." Then she found the document. The supply man from San Cristo made his monthly stop on a Wednesday morning. She knew the day because she had started paying attention to the rhythm of the camp's external contacts. He came with flour and salt and occasional mail, and the particular energy of someone who is a small but essential thread connecting two very different worlds. She was helping distribute the supplies from the cart, carrying bundles to the women who came to collect them, when a folded paper slipped from between 2 sacks of flour and fell into the dust at her feet. She picked it up, started to hand it back to the supply man. He had already moved to the other side of the cart and didn't notice. She looked at the paper, official seal, territorial letterhead. The name Colonel Aldous Vane, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of the Interior, in neat government print at the top. She should have handed it back. She knew that, the way you know things when you're about to not do them. She read it instead. Pursuant to the surveying order of April 1874, the following territories have been identified for mineral extraction assessment, specifically silver ore deposits of significant commercial value, and then coordinates. And then a map notation with a location she recognized from Chase's descriptions of his people's hunting grounds. And then, in the careful bloodless language that government documents use when they want to say something terrible without appearing to, it is recommended that the current occupants be maintained in peaceful non-resistance during the period of geological survey, after which relocation to designated reservation areas may be implemented per existing treaty provisions. She read it twice. Her hands were very still, maintained in peaceful non-resistance during the period of geological survey. The treaty, Chase's treaty, 2 years of negotiation, the condition that had brought her here, his living piece of evidence, his white witness, all of it. It was never about peace, it was about keeping them still. Cooperative, documented as peaceful and compliant while the government measured what was under their feet and decided how to take it. The treaty was a waiting room, and the door at the end of it did not lead anywhere good. She folded the paper with careful hands. Her hands were doing their job calmly, while the rest of her was doing something that had no clean name. Not anger exactly. Anger was too specific and too small for what this was. She looked across the camp. Chase was at the far edge in conversation with two of the elders. He stood with his back mostly to her. She could see the set of his shoulders, the slight forward angle of his head, when he was listening carefully to something that mattered. She thought about the letter he had sent her. Not an unkind life. She thought about his mother who had stayed. She thought about Silver Fox, saying he never gave the box to anyone. She thought about the little girl who had stopped staring at her 2 weeks ago and started waving. She tucked the document into her dress, close to her chest, pressed against her father's Bible. She would need it. She didn't know yet for what, but it would matter. And somewhere above the camp, the wind moved through the canyon walls, the way it had been moving, for longer than the paper in her dress had any right to understand. Indifferent and beautiful and very old, and Eliza Hart of Missouri stood in the dust of a camp she was beginning to know, and looked at the man she had married, and felt something shift in her chest that she was not ready to name. Not yet, but she would be soon. The desert does not care about your plans. That was the first thing Eliza learned. Not from anyone, not from a lesson or a careful explanation, just from living in it long enough to notice. Missouri had weather, Arizona had opinions. The wind came when it wanted. The heat stayed longer than was reasonable. The rain, when it finally arrived, came all at once like it had been saving up resentment for months and had finally decided to spend it. And the land itself, red and vast and so ancient it made Missouri feel like something built last Tuesday. It looked at you the way very old things look at very young things. Patient, slightly amused, waiting to see what you'd do next before deciding whether you were worth watching. Eliza stopped fighting it somewhere in the 4th week. She couldn't have told you the exact moment. There was no single morning she woke and thought, right, I accept this place. It was more gradual than that, more like the way calluses form on your hands. You don't feel them building. You just notice one day that something that used to cut you doesn't cut the same way anymore. Her hands were different now. She looked at them one morning in the early light and barely recognized them as the hands that had turned Bible pages in Missouri. Still her hands. Still the same fingers that had written careful letters in her best handwriting, that had reached for Aunt Miriam at the train station and found empty air. But harder now, more capable. The hands of a woman who had been finding out what she was made of, which turned out to be considerably more than she'd been given credit for, including by herself. She ground corn before sunrise without being asked, carried water, helped repair the mud brick edges of lodges after nights of hard wind peeled them back. She still made mistakes, plenty of them, but they were new mistakes now, which was different. The old mistakes had been about not knowing where she was. The new ones were about reaching further than she could currently manage, which was a much better kind of mistake to make. Silver Fox watched her progress with the expression of a woman who had seen many things begin and knew better than to celebrate before she understood what they were becoming. But sometimes when Eliza did something correctly without being shown how, the old woman made a small sound, low, approving, like a door opening a fraction of an inch in a room that had been sealed a long time. Eliza counted those sounds privately like coins she was saving for something she hadn't identified yet. Reed remained a complicated spirit condition, not hostile, not welcoming. He existed near her in a way that communicated clearly, without words, that he was still measuring, still deciding, still she not convinced she was anything other than a problem his brother had acquired through difficult circumstances and would eventually have to account for. One morning she was working a knot out of a length of rope that had been used badly and cinched itself into something close to permanent. She had been at it 10 minutes. Her fingers were losing the argument. Reed walked past, stopped, looked at the knot, looked at her hands, looked at the knot again, took the rope, undid the knot in approximately 4 seconds, with a grip and a twist she hadn't considered, handed it back, walked away without a word or a change in expression. Eliza stared at the back of his head as he went. Was that help, she thought? I believe that was help. It was the most reluctant help I have ever received in my life, and it came with absolutely no warmth attached to it. But I'm choosing to count it as movement in the right direction. He counted it. Chase was teaching her to read the land. Not the way she read books. Not the way she read people, which she had been doing her whole life in her father's congregation, learning to tell the difference between those who came to church for God and those who came for the feeling of being seen. This was older, more physical. The way the color of the eastern sky at first light told you whether the afternoon would bring stillness or wind. The way certain birds in certain formations meant water, within a mile in a direction you hadn't considered. The way the temperature dropped a specific number of degrees in the half hour before rain, which was rare enough here that you paid attention when it came. He taught her without flourish, pointed, named, asked her to repeat what she'd observed, waited while she found the words. He was the most patient teacher she had encountered, and she had spent her whole life in the company of a patient teacher. Her father had believed, with the complete conviction of someone who has built his life on a principle, that the purpose of knowledge was to be given away to anyone who would sit still long enough to receive it. She told Chase this one evening about her father, about the church, and the way he read aloud to an empty room, because the words deserved to be spoken whether anyone was there to hear them or not. Chase listened without interrupting, which was how he always listened, with his full attention and none of the small performances of listening that most people offered. When she finished, he said, "He sounds like a man who understood that nothing you give away is truly gone." She looked at him. She had not thought about her father's death that way. She had been thinking of it as a taking, the world removing something from her without consent. But Chase had just turned it slightly on its axis, quietly, without making a production of the gesture, and from the new angle it looked different. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what he was." She looked at the fire for a while and decided for the first time since Missouri that the world might not be made entirely of loss. The trouble started in the 5th week. It began the way most trouble begins, with a rumor small enough to slip through the cracks and stubborn enough to survive there. Cattle missing from a ranch southeast of San Cristo. 3 head, then 6. A wagon found with a broken wheel on the river trail. 2 crates of provisions taken. A fence cut on the northwest edge of the Harker property. The cut so clean it suggested someone who knew what they were doing, rather than someone angry. None of this was unusual in the Arizona territory, where outlaws and opportunists and plain misfortune were distributed like a landscape, with the democratic indifference of weather. Things went missing. Fences got cut. It happened. But the whisper that attached itself to these particular incidents was the problem. Apache, just that word. No evidence produced, no witness stepping forward. Just the word moving through San Cristo like smoke through a building, getting into everything, leaving a smell on everything it touched. Chase heard it before Eliza did. Of course he did. He had a network of information she was only beginning to understand. Trading relationships built over years. Men in town who owed him fair dealing and repaid it in useful news. An awareness of the territory's moods that came from having navigated them carefully for a long time. He knew within 2 days what was being said, and by whom, and with what degree of conviction. He did not tell Eliza. Not because he was hiding it from her. Because he was thinking. She had learned to recognize the difference. She found out from Reed. Reed came back from a supply run to San Cristo on a Thursday with his jaw set in a way that exceeded his usual expression, and said to Chase, when he believed Eliza was on the other side of the lodge and therefore out of earshot, "They're saying it's us. Murphy is telling anyone who'll stand still long enough." Eliza was not out of earshot. She had learned in 5 weeks that useful information often arrived when people thought you were elsewhere. She stayed where she was, still, around the corner of the lodge wall. Chase said, "Murphy has been looking for a reason since spring. He doesn't need a good one," Reed said. "He just needs one that's loud enough." Silence. "We didn't touch his cattle," Reed said. Not a question. "No," Chase said. Another silence. "Longer. Then who did?" Reed said. And Chase, after a moment that had weight in it, "Someone who needs us to look dangerous." Eliza stood against the warm clay wall of the lodge and felt the folded document she'd been keeping inside. Her dress suddenly felt very specific, very purposeful, like something that had been waiting for its moment to become useful. Someone who needs us to look dangerous. She thought about Colonel Aldous Vane, his official seal, his careful government language about maintaining peaceful non-resistance during geological survey, his plan to keep these people still and cooperative while the government decided what to do about the silver underneath their land. She thought about what you do, practically, when you want to break a treaty without being seen to break it. You make the other party look like they broke it first. She pressed her back against the lodge wall. The clay was warm from the afternoon sun, solid and certain. Right, she told herself. Think. Colonel Aldous Vane arrived in San Cristo on a Tuesday. She was certain it was Tuesday because the supply man came Tuesdays, and he arrived the same morning as Vane's military escort, and the timing of that overlap did not feel accidental to her. Silver Fox told her about the colonel's mood, with the economy of someone who understood that information had weight and should not be wasted on unnecessary words. "Soldier chief," Silver Fox said. "Washington man. 3 days now, 3 days." He had been in San Cristo for 3 days, and neither Chase nor Reed had mentioned it, which meant either they didn't know, unlikely given Chase's network, or they knew and were deciding what to do, possible, or they knew and had made a decision and hadn't yet decided what to tell her, which was the option she liked least of the three. She thought about asking Chase directly. She could see the conversation already. Him being measured and careful, giving her the shape of the thing without the interior. Her being frustrated by the measured carefulness, the two of them circling the fact without touching it. She went to San Cristo herself instead. She did not tell Chase she was going. She told Silver Fox, who looked at her with those ancient eyes for a long moment and then said, "Wear the blue dress." "I only have the blue dress and the gray dress," Eliza said. "Blue," Silver Fox said again. "Firm. You look less like someone who is angry in blue." Eliza considered arguing about this. Then she put on the blue dress. She had been to San Cristo twice before, both times with Chase, both times aware of the particular quality of attention she received. Not hostile exactly, but specific, the kind people give to something that doesn't fit the category they expected. Alone was different. The looks had more room in them, more calculation, less certainty about what they were looking at. She found Vane outside the hotel. She had asked at the trading post where the Washington man was staying and had ridden there directly. She was a preacher's daughter. She had watched her father walk up to difficult conversations her whole childhood. She knew how it was done. Colonel Aldous Vane was perhaps 50, well-dressed in the careful way of a man who understands that appearance is argument. Silver hair kept neat despite the territory's best efforts against it. The face of a man who had spent years learning to seem reasonable, which was different from being reasonable, and the difference was visible if you knew to look. He saw her coming and produced a smile. It didn't reach his eyes, and he didn't try particularly hard to make it. "Mrs. Chase," he said, using the name the legal registry had given her. "Colonel Vane," she said. She did not dismount immediately. Let him stand looking up at her for a moment, before she tied the mare and turned to face him. With her hands folded in front of her, the stance her father had taught her for moments when the room needed to understand you were not going to move. He gestured toward the hotel door. "Shall we speak inside?" she said. Something shifted in his eyes. Gone before she could categorize it. The smile held. "Of course. I wanted to express my concern for the position you found yourself in. A young woman of good standing, brought here under somewhat misleading circumstances." He paused, letting that word do its work. "The Bureau is prepared to assist you." "Assist," she said. Just the word, returned to him flat. "We could arrange your return to Missouri. Documentation establishing that your presence here was not fully voluntary. Your reputation would be entirely preserved." He tilted his head slightly. "All we would need is a statement from you regarding the activities of the band. Any departures from the treaty terms. Any aggressive behavior you may have witnessed." "There haven't been any," she said. Silence, surely during 5 weeks of close observation. "I've observed people working, raising children, trading honestly and honoring their agreements." She held his gaze. "I've been there 5 weeks, Colonel. I know exactly what I've seen." His composure recalibrated, subtle, but she caught it. "Mrs. Chase," he said, "there are larger considerations at work here that a young woman in your position may not have full visibility into." "Are the larger considerations the silver deposit?" she said. The silence this time was a different material entirely. His face did not move, not a single muscle, which was, she thought, its own complete answer. "Where did you hear that?" he said, very quiet. She held his gaze and said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then the careful smile returned, thinner now, like a garment that no longer quite fit. "I hope you'll reconsider," he said. "For your own sake." "Good day, Colonel," she said. She untied the mare and rode back toward the desert. Her hands were shaking slightly on the reins. She didn't permit herself to notice this until she was far enough from town that no one could see. That went well, she told herself. That was either very brave or a significant miscalculation. She genuinely could not determine which. She told Chase that evening, all of it. She had gone back and forth during the ride about whether to tell him, and had landed on yes, because carrying things alone was a habit she was trying to break, and because he deserved to know what was moving toward him. He listened without interrupting. His face was very still, the particular stillness she had learned to read as concentration rather than remoteness. He was taking in everything she said, all of it, and organizing it behind those gray eyes. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You confronted a colonel of the United States Army," he said. "Yes, alone, yes." A pause. "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because someone needed to, and I was there." Something moved through his expression too quickly to name completely. She caught the edge of it. Not alarm. Not surprise, exactly. Something that looked more like recognition. The way your face changes when you encounter something you've seen before in a form you weren't expecting. "He'll move faster now," Chase said. "Whatever he was building toward, he'll accelerate it. You've shown him you know." "I know," she said. "That was a risk. I know that too." He looked at the canyon walls, already going dark with evening. "Natan Sombre," she said, his real name. The one that carried weight. He looked back at her. "What does Vane do next?" she asked. He held her gaze. "He removes the reason to stay peaceful," Chase said. 3 days after her conversation with Vane, men came to San Cristo. Not soldiers, nothing official. 8 men. Riding in from the east with the look of people who have been hired to do something specific and are keeping the specifics to themselves. They took rooms at the hotel, drank at the saloon, kept their faces arranged in the neutral expression of people who are waiting for a signal they've been told to expect. Sheriff Briggs noticed them the first night. He was not a man who missed things that arrived in his town. He spoke with the leader, a broad man with a flat voice, who said they were passing through, on their way to the copper mines south of the territory. Said it smoothly and without hesitation, which told Briggs it was a prepared answer rather than a true one. Briggs found Eliza at the trading post on her weekly supply run 2 days later. "You need to get back to the canyon," he said. Direct, the way he talked when he was worried enough to skip the approach. "Why?" she said. "I've a sheriff 19 years, he said. "I know what men look like when they're waiting for permission to do something they've already decided on." She thought about Vane, about he'll move faster now. "How long do we have?" she asked. He shook his head. "I can't tell you that." She loaded the supplies in half her usual time and rode back hard. Chase had already heard. His own sources had registered the same men. He had been in conversation with the elders since afternoon, and the camp had taken on the particular quiet of a place that is preparing itself for something, without wanting to name the thing it's preparing for. "We moved to the high country," Reed said. He was pacing, which was what he did when he was afraid and wouldn't call it that. "Take the families up into the canyon. It's defensible." "Running looks like guilt," Chase said. "If we move, they'll say we moved because we had something to hide. Staying, if we stay, we have done nothing wrong." Which is the truth, and the truth has to carry some weight. "The truth," Reed said, stopping, "has never stopped a bullet." The two brothers looked at each other across the fire. Eliza watched them and understood something she had been slowly understanding for weeks. This was not a tactical disagreement. This was an old argument, the argument of a family that had been navigating impossible choices for so long. The disagreement had its own shape, its own worn grooves. Reed's answer: move, protect the living, survive. Chase's answer: hold, stand, remain, because retreat is its own kind of defeat when you have already given up so much. Neither was wrong. Both were right in ways that couldn't be resolved. And the distance between those two kinds of rightness was the space they had been living in for years. "What about Briggs?" Eliza said. Both looked at her. "He came to warn me," she said. "He didn't have to. That means he's not in Vane's pocket. That means there's at least one person in San Cristo with legal authority who might act on information if it were given to him correctly." She looked at Chase. "I've been holding on to a document. I made a copy of it, best I could from memory, and I could give Briggs the copy. Keep the original safe." She had spent 2 evenings by firelight carefully reproducing the document from memory onto a blank sheet from her journal. Every detail she could recall. Coordinates, dates, the language about peaceful non-resistance and relocation. She had written it as precisely as she could, in the margin noting that it was reproduced from a document bearing the seal of Colonel Aldous Vane, Department of the Interior, and that she would swear to its accuracy. The original stayed against her Bible, inside her dress. The copy was what she would give Briggs. "The document puts you directly in the middle of this," Chase said. "I'm already in the middle," she said. "I've been in the middle since I confronted Vane outside the hotel. That particular door has been closed behind me for some time." Reed stared at her with an expression that was working through several things simultaneously. He looked at his brother, then back at her. "You confronted Vane," he said. "Someone needed to." Reed looked at his brother again with an expression that had reluctant respect in it, pushed way to the back, but visible if you were looking. "She's strange," he said. "For Missouri. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment," Eliza said. "Take it however you want," Reed said. But something at the edge of his mouth moved in a direction that was not quite his usual expression. She counted it, obviously. She went to Briggs the next morning. His office was small and smelled of old coffee and paperwork. He brought the reproduced document twice, then a third time, with the careful attention of a man who understands that what he's reading may have consequences he'll have to live with for some time. He set it down, looked at it. "This is federal," he said. "Vane specifically, yes. I reproduced it from a document I came across. I've kept the original." She met his eyes. "I'll testify to the accuracy of what I've written, on record, publicly." He looked at her for a long moment, then at the document again. Then he rubbed the back of his neck in the way of a man who has just agreed to something difficult and is already feeling the weight of it. "I'll write to the territorial governor," he said. "Document what I know from my end. That's the reach of my authority." He paused. "It won't be fast. It never is," she said. He nodded slowly. "All right, let's see what the governor's made of." She rode back to the canyon and told Chase. He listened. "Briggs is a decent man," he said finally. "Cautious, but decent." He looked at the fire. "It may be enough. It may not be enough in time." "Then we do both," she said. "We trust Briggs and we stay. We don't run. We give the process the chance it needs." He looked at her in the particular way he had, the one that made her feel seen rather than assessed. "You speak like someone who has decided something," he said. "I have," she said, though she didn't say yet what it was she'd decided, because she wasn't entirely ready to say it. Not yet. The gathering came 4 days later. She heard about it the night before, a meeting at the saloon. Murphy the rancher and others. The men from the east who were supposedly passing through, still in town and still waiting. The shape of a thing building toward an ending it had chosen before anyone admitted it out loud. She told Chase she was going. He said, "No," she said, "I wasn't asking your permission." He looked at her with those storm gray eyes. "It isn't safe for you there. They may not see you as one of theirs anymore." "Good," she said. "Then let them see what I am, which is your wife, and let that mean something." She held his gaze. "You told me words build bridges. Let me go build one." A long silence. "I'm going with you," he said. "I know," she said. "I was counting on it." They rode into San Cristo together the next morning, side by side. His painted stallion and her bay mare. The heat already rising from the main street's packed earth, making the air shimmer at the edges of things. People on the boardwalk stopped to watch them come. Eliza kept her back straight and her hands easy on the reins, and she wore the blue dress because Silver Fox had standing instructions about the blue dress. The crowd was already in the street. 15 or 20 men. Murphy at the front, red-faced and loud in the way of a man who has found an audience and is performing his anger for it. The hired men from the east distributed throughout in positions that were meant to appear casual and did not succeed. Vane was not there. She noticed his absence immediately. He would not be seen at something like this. He was too careful for that. He had arranged things and stepped back to where the arrangement and couldn't be traced to him, and had left other people to carry the visible parts. She dismounted before Chase did, which meant she was the one who walked toward the crowd first. Murphy saw her. His expression went through several calculations quickly. "Mrs. Crow," he said, using the wrong name, either through ignorance or intention. "I live out there," she said, clearly, loudly enough for the people at the edges of the crowd to catch it. "I've lived there for 6 weeks. I eat alongside those families. I work with those women. I know their children by name." She stopped in front of him. "Tell me what you think you've seen that I haven't." Murphy's face darkened. "We've got missing cattle." "You have missing cattle," she agreed. "And you have 8 hired men who arrived in town 5 days ago from the east. Who paid for those men, Mr. Murphy?" Silence dropped over the crowd like something physical, not the silence of people with nothing to say. The silence of people who are suddenly listening very carefully because someone has just said something that reframes the room. Nobody hired, she started. Somebody did, she said, but sped. And I don't think it was you. I think you're genuinely angry about your cattle, which is fair. And I think someone handed you a direction to point that anger. Which isn't fair. Not to you and not to anyone else in this street. Chase had dismounted behind her. He stood a few feet back, not beside her. He was giving her the space. She felt his presence at her back the way you feel solid ground beneath your feet. It didn't make her less afraid, but it made the fear something she could stand inside without collapsing. Briggs stepped forward from the crowd's edge. Miss Hart. Eliza, she said. Then back to the crowd. I have documentation about where those cattle went and who arranged for them to go missing. I'll share it with the sheriff, publicly, on record. She looked around at the assembled faces. Anyone who wants to hear that conversation is welcome to stay for it. Murphy's mouth opened, closed. The crowd shifted. The hired men in the back exchanged looks. One moved his hand toward his coat and stopped. Briggs moved forward and placed himself between the crowd and the space where Eliza and Chase stood. It was a small thing, but it was the gesture of a man who had made a choice and was standing in it. All right, he said, loud enough for the street to hear. This is done for today. Everyone go home. The crowd broke up. Not dramatically, not completely. Murphy left with his anger intact but redirected, looking for something to focus it on that made sense. The hired men dispersed without incident. And Briggs took Eliza and Chase into his office, and they spent 2 hours going over everything she had, everything Briggs had observed, everything Chase could add about the timing and pattern of the incidents. On the ride back to the canyon, the sun going long and gold behind the western ridgeline and painting everything copper and rust, Chase said, "You spoke like a chief's wife today." She looked at him. "Is that the highest compliment you have?" "Yes," he said without a pause. She looked forward again at the canyon opening ahead, the thin threads of smoke from the evening fires, the first stars showing in the deep blue just above the eastern rim. "Chase," she said, "yes, I still haven't opened the box." "I know," he said. "I think about it. Every day I think about it." She kept her eyes on the canyon. "I want you to know that." He said nothing, but she was aware, from the edge of her vision, that he was looking at her, and that what was in his face was something she wasn't quite ready to look at directly yet. Almost, but not quite yet. The attack came on a moonless night. There were signs she had failed to read. The horses had been restless since well before sunset, shifting and stamping at their tethering posts in a way that wasn't the ordinary restlessness of evening. She had noticed it, had filed it as the approach of weather, had been wrong, and would not make that particular mistake again. She woke to orange light on the lodge walls. Orange meant fire, and not the ordinary fire of camp life, the controlled, purposeful fire that she had learned to maintain and respect. This was fire moving. She was on her feet before she was fully awake. 6 weeks in the desert had changed her response time in ways she hadn't registered until she registered them. 6 weeks ago, she would have lain confused for a moment, trying to make sense of waking. Now her body had made a prior agreement with her mind about the need for speed. Outside was chaos. Lodges burning at the eastern edge of the camp, 3 of them, the flames catching the dry wood of their frames with a speed that suggested they had been started with intention and accelerated with something that burned fast. Men on horseback moving through the camp, their faces wrapped against identification, torches in hand. Gunshots cracking high and sharp in the night air. Children screaming, and dogs and horses, and the terrible percussion of hooves on packed earth from multiple directions at once. She looked for Chase, found him already moving through the smoke, rifle in hand, his face carrying the specific expression of a man doing what must be done without time to feel anything about it yet. He turned, saw her. "Get back," he shouted above the noise. "Get the women and children to the north end." A figure came out of the smoke behind him. She saw it. He didn't. A rifle stock swung hard at the side of his head. Chase went down. No, she was already moving. But Reed got there first, appearing from the smoke as if summoned, dropping to his knees beside his brother and getting an arm under him. Eliza reached them 2 seconds later. Chase was breathing, stayed his eyes trying to focus, a cut above his left temple already bleeding steadily down his face. "I'm all right," he said, which he was clearly not. 3 men on horseback converged, and then Silver Fox was beside Eliza, small and absolutely immovable. She took Eliza's arm in a grip that would have surprised you if you hadn't spent 6 weeks learning that the woman's size was not a reliable indicator of anything. "No," Silver Fox said, not loudly, not to the chaos around them, just to Eliza. "If you die, Hope dies also." Eliza looked at Chase, at the men closing in, at Reed, who had his knife out against 3 armed and mounted men, which was brave and also not by any calculation going to be enough. "If you die, Hope dies also." She understood what the old woman meant. She was the witness, the living document, the one person whose presence and testimony stood between this situation and a version of events written entirely by Vane. If she was killed here tonight, in this attack that Vane had arranged and would disclaim, then there was no one left to contradict the story he would tell. She had to survive. She had to survive even though every part of her was pulling the other direction. She ran, through the smoke and the gunshots, and the sound of the camp coming apart around her. Through the firelight and the darkness alternating. She ran and she grabbed 2 things on her way out of her lodge. Her father's Bible, which was reflex, which was muscle memory going all the way back to Missouri, and the wooden box, which she grabbed because she could not leave it and didn't know why and didn't have time to find out. She ran until her legs made the decision for her, 3 miles into the desert, and she went down hard under a sandstone arch, knees and palms on cold desert floor, and she stayed there. She pressed her forehead against the wooden box, and she wept. Not the contained, dignified kind of weeping. The kind that comes from below the place where dignity lives. The kind that sounds like something breaking and doesn't apologize for the sound. She wept until she was empty of it. Then she lay on her back on the desert floor under the sandstone arch and looked up at the sky. Stars. More of them than she had ever seen in Missouri, where the trees and the weather and the church steeple and the general business of human settlement got between you and the sky. Out here there was nothing between you and the stars except your own capacity to look at them, which was something you could work on. She breathed. In, then out. In, then out. She was alone in the desert. She had a wooden box and her father's Bible and the original document pressed against her chest and the stars watching from a very great height. She was terrified. She was alive. And somewhere behind her, in the canyon, the fires were still burning. She could smell the smoke from 3 miles away. This is not the end of this, she told herself. This is not the end. She held the box. She did not open it. Not yet. The box would be opened when she was ready, and ready meant something specific, and she was not there yet. She was close. She was closer than she had been yesterday. But not yet. She closed her eyes and listened to the desert breathe around her, and she thought about Chase on the ground in the firelight, dazed, bleeding, surrounded, and she thought, I am going to find him. Tomorrow, at first light, with whatever I can pull together. I am going to go and find him. And then, under the sandstone arch, under the weight of all those stars, Eliza Hart of Missouri did something she had not done in a very long time. She slept. The desert at night is not empty. That was something Missouri had never taught her. Missouri dark was just dark, absence of light. A thing you waited through until morning came back and made the world readable again. Arizona dark was different in kind. It breathed. The canyon walls held the day's heat, long after the sun was gone, and released it slow into the night air, the way something exhales after a long, sustained effort. The stars were not decoration up here. They were presence. Wait. The kind of sky that has been watching things happen for so long, it has stopped being surprised by any particular outcome and simply continues watching, patient and indifferent and beautiful, in the way of things that have no need to be anything other than exactly what they are. Eliza woke under the sandstone arch as the sky was beginning to think about changing color in the east. Not sunrise yet. The hour before it. The hour that feels like the world holding its breath before it decides whether to begin again. She lay still for a moment and took inventory. Her knees were scraped from when she'd gone down hard the night before. Her palms the same. Her dress was torn at the left shoulder where she'd caught it on something in the dark and hadn't noticed until the running stopped. Her throat was raw from smoke and from the crying, and her whole body had the particular heaviness of someone who has used everything she had and has not yet had time to replenish it. She was alive. That was the first thing. Before anything else, That was what mattered, and she needed to establish it clearly before she could move to what came next. Alive. Uninjured in any serious way. In possession of one wooden box with a carved bird on the lid, one Bible with one original government document pressed between the pages of Exodus, where she'd moved it the morning after finding it because Exodus seemed appropriate, one torn blue dress, a silver ring on her left hand, and a husband somewhere in the desert behind her, taken by men who had been paid to take him. Don't spiral, she told herself. You know what spiraling costs. It costs you the very clarity you need right now. Feel the fear, note its presence, and then set it aside somewhere accessible for later when you can afford it. She sat up. The wooden box was in her lap. She had been holding it so long in her sleep that her fingers had stiffened around it. She loosened them one at a time, deliberately, the way you uncurl something that has been clenched too long. The carved bird on the lid caught the first gray of pre-dawn. She looked at it. Open it when your heart is ready. Her heart was not what she would call ready. Her heart was frightened and scraped raw and running several arguments in a way that made it difficult to identify any single feeling with precision. But she turned the question over. What did ready actually mean? Whether it meant unafraid, whether it meant certain of the outcome, whether it meant whole in some way she hadn't achieved yet, or whether it meant something simpler than any of that. Whether ready was just the moment when you stopped having any other choice. Whether ready was simply now. This, here, under the stars, with the desert breathing all around you and no road back to anything familiar. She opened the box. The latch gave without resistance, like it had been waiting for exactly this amount of time and no more. Inside, two things: a sash of silk folded small and neat, crimson and gold together, the colors wound through each other. Colors that caught even this thin pre-dawn light and held it. Colors that didn't belong to any world she had come from, but that felt in this specific moment like the truest things she had touched since she stepped off the train in San Cristo. And beneath the sash, a letter, folded twice. Her name on the outside in that same careful, steady handwriting she had first seen on a letter that arrived in Missouri with train tickets and a silver ring, and the phrase "not an unkind one," which she had read 4 times in a kitchen in Missouri that felt very far from this sandstone arch. She unfolded the letter slowly. The paper was slightly worn at the creases, as though it had been folded and unfolded before she ever touched it, as though he had written it and reread it, and then folded it away, and wondered for a long time whether she would ever open it. Eliza, if you are reading this, the road has been hard. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for what I asked of you without truly asking. I am sorry for the way this began. But I am not sorry you came. You are free. That is what this box was always meant to hold. Not an object, a door left open. You may leave this place and return to your world. I will have no claim on you, and neither will anything here. Take the document inside your Bible if you need it. Take whatever you need. Take everything. The sash is the mark of a wife among my people. It is not a requirement. It is not a condition of the treaty or of your safety or of anything that exists outside your own choosing. Wear it only if you choose me. Not from duty, not from fear. Not because the road back to Missouri is long and you are tired and this seems easier than the alternative. Only if you choose me. Because you want to. Because this canyon and these people and whatever is between us is where you want to be. I will not ask more than that. I have never been able to ask more than that, even when I wanted to. Natan Sombra, Thomas Chase. Whatever name finds you first. She read it once. She read it again. And she sat for a very long time under the sandstone arch with the sash in her hands and the letter in her lap and the desert breathing around her in the hour before dawn. She thought about Missouri, about her father's church, about the mended hem on the black dress, about Aunt Miriam's kitchen table and the newspaper with 3 red circles, about the gray street and the gray sky, and the gray future she could see assembling itself without her. She thought about the train. 6 days. Green going to red. Everything familiar becoming everything foreign. The girl she had been when she stepped aboard that train in her best traveling dress, imagining a fair-haired steady man with calloused hands and kind eyes. She thought about calluses that were now on her own hands. About 47 Apache words, 15 used correctly. About Silver Fox's small approving sound. About reeds not undone in 4 seconds. About the specific color of a desert sky before rain arrives, which she now knew how to read. She thought about a man sitting through the dark, beside a woman with a fever, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth, saying words she couldn't understand, in a voice she didn't need to understand, because the sound of it was enough. She thought about a letter that gave her freedom instead of taking it. And she thought, what kind of man does that? What kind of man writes the door open? What kind of man builds a thing and then hands you the key and says, go if you want. I will not stop you. I will not even ask you not to. The kind of man her father would have recognized immediately and approved of without reservation. The kind of man who understood that nothing you give away is truly gone. She picked up the sash. She held it for a moment. The silk was fine, carefully made. Someone had put real time into this. She thought about who had made it, whether Chase had asked, or whether the women of the camp had done it on their own. The way people do things for the people they love without announcing themselves. She thought it was probably the second thing. She thought it was probably Silver Fox who had organized it and said nothing about it, and waited. She tied the sash over her left shoulder. The crimson and gold settled against the torn blue dress, as though they had always been there, as though the blue dress had been waiting for this particular edition since Missouri. She stood up, picked up the box, put the letter back inside with the care she gave things that mattered, closed the latch, put the box in her saddlebag alongside her father's Bible, looked east, the direction of the canyon, the direction of Chase wherever he was. Right, she said, not out loud, in the interior place where her father's voice had always lived, and still lived, and would probably always live. Right. Let's go. She found water before she found anything else. There was a small seep in a rock face half a mile northeast of the sandstone arch, where Chase had taken her on a morning 3 weeks ago, when he was teaching her to read the canyon. He had shown her the seep without making a production of it. Just, here, this is water. Remember this. She had filed it away without knowing what she was filing it for. Now she knew. You pay attention, the desert said, and the desert pays you back. She drank. Let the mare drink. Rested 15 minutes with deliberate precision, counting her breaths, because rest was not comfort right now, but calculation. She needed to be capable. She could not be capable while running on empty. 15 minutes was the minimum investment for the maximum return. Then she moved. The tracks from the attack were degraded by wind but not gone. She could see enough. Chase had been taken north. Reed had said north toward the first ridge. She knew this ground now. Not the way someone who had lived here all their life knew it. But enough. Enough to navigate. Enough to read the signs Chase had taught her. She rode through the hour before full sunrise, when the light was gray and thin and everything had edges without color, and she thought about what she was riding toward and what she had left behind, and whether the person doing this riding was the same person who had stepped off a train in San Cristo 6 weeks ago. She was not. She was not remotely the same person. That person had imagined a fair-haired man with kind eyes and a quiet ranch, and a life that might be ordinary but would at least be hers. That person had $43 of other people's debt and a cracked china teacup and a Bible and very little else. This person had calluses and a knife in her boot, which she had put there this morning when she was preparing, because 6 weeks in the desert had taught her to prepare for things she hoped wouldn't happen, and a document that could bring down a colonel of the United States Army if given to the right person in the right way, and a crimson and gold sash over her shoulder that meant she had made a choice, and the choice was not reversible, and she was not interested in reversing it. She found Reed at the second rally point as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, the flat red rock formation 2 miles south of the canyon. Chase had mentioned it once, in the context of explaining how the band communicated when circumstances required them to scatter. There were points, pre-agreed, where people would gather if the camp became untenable. She had listened carefully when he said it, the way she listened to everything he taught her about the land, because she had already learned that you didn't know which lesson would matter until the moment arrived. Reed was there with 6 warriors, 2 of them with injuries that needed proper attention, all of them with horses and weapons, and the specific focused stillness of people who have gotten through the immediate emergency and are now waiting for the next decision to become clear. Reed saw her come over the ridge on the bay mare, and his face did something she had not seen it do before. Relief. He put it away quickly, reaching for his usual expression, but she had seen it. It had been there for a full second before he covered it, which was a full second more than she'd expected from him. "You're alive," he said. "So are you." she said. Where is he? The expression that replaced the relief was not the scowl exactly. Something harder than that. Something that carried weight. We don't know, he said. Her stomach dropped. She kept it controlled. She had gotten better at keeping things controlled when she needed to. Tell me everything you know, she said. From the moment he went down, he told her. After Chase went down and Reed got to him, 3 mounted men came in fast and there was a fight, and Reed was pulled away from his brother, and in the chaos, coordinated chaos, not random. She noted this. Chase was taken on horseback, headed north. The fires had been set by separate riders working the eastern lodges, while the main group came through the center. 2 operations running at once. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had been given the camp's layout in enough detail to know where to split the defenders. Vane, she said. Has to be. There's an abandoned mining camp, she said. North of the canyon, near the first ridge. The supply man mentioned it last month. He said it had been used as a way station for the geological survey teams before the survey was suspended pending the treaty review. She looked at Reed directly. If Vane needed a place to hold someone, off the official record. Not in San Cristo where Briggs could see it. Not anywhere that had an address you could put on a document. Reed looked at her. You think, he said. I think, she said. It's the best direction I have. Yes or no, it gives us somewhere to go. He was quiet for 3 seconds exactly. Lead, he said. They rode north in the last darkness before dawn, 8 of them moving across the desert floor, with the horses kept to the sand where the hooves left less sound. The stars were thinning at the eastern edge. The air had the specific chill of the hour just before the sun makes its decision. Cold enough to remind you that the desert is not always what it is at noon. Eliza rode at the front beside Reed. She knew the approximate direction. He knew how to approach a position without advertising the approach. Neither of them discussed the division of labor. It arranged itself, the way things arrange themselves when people understand what they each bring and stop needing to negotiate about it. She thought about her father reading Psalms to an empty church on Tuesday evenings, because the words deserved to be spoken regardless of the audience. She thought, I am showing up with my piece. The mining camp appeared in the gray pre-dawn light, like something that had been left behind by people who had lost interest in it and walked away without looking back. A cluster of low structures, stone and old timber silvered with weather and time. A corral with new rope strung on old posts. That detail was wrong. That detail was recent. The rope was pale and clean against the darkened wood. Someone had arrived here lately and made deliberate use of what was already standing. Horses tethered in the corral. She counted them carefully as they crested the ridge and looked down. 8 horses, which meant 8 men. And near the entrance of the largest structure, visible in the gray light, a figure. Head down, still, not moving much, but breathing. She could see even from this distance, even in this thin pre-dawn light, the slight rise and fall of his shoulders with each breath, steady and deliberate. The breathing of someone who has made a decision to conserve everything he has left, until the right moment arrives to use it. Something in her chest released a tension she hadn't realized was structural until it released. Like a load-bearing rope that had been holding something up from the inside and had finally been permitted to set it down. She put her hand on Reed's arm. He stopped, looked where she was looking. His jaw set in the way it set when he had assessed a situation and understood it completely, and did not like what he understood. 6 outside, he said barely above a breath. More inside probably. That matches the horses. He nodded slowly. We can take the outside ones quiet, but not before someone inside hears, and then we lose the element and whatever's happening in there gets worse before we can stop it. She thought about Vane, about the way he operated, distance and deniability and the performance of reason. He would want to talk. He had wanted to talk since San Cristo. He thought he still had a negotiation available to him, because men like Vane always believed there was a negotiation available to them, right up until the moment someone demonstrated otherwise. Give me 2 minutes inside first, she said. He'll want to talk. I'll make him talk long enough. You come in after 2 minutes. Reed turned to look at her fully. That, he said, is not a good plan. 1 minute 40, she said. Then come in regardless. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing something in the pre-dawn light that had moved, over 6 weeks, a considerable distance from where it started. Something that looked, underneath all the things Reed kept on top of his feelings, a great deal like trust. Reluctant. earned through specific evidence. Real. 1:40, he said. She rode down toward before the part of her that fully understood risk could complete its calculation. The men outside saw her coming. Of course they did. She was not attempting invisibility. She was a woman in a torn blue dress, with a crimson gold sash, riding a bay mare at dawn toward an abandoned mining camp. She understood clearly the last thing any of them expected, which was precisely the kind of leverage available to people who have nothing more conventional to work with. She noted the layout as she dismounted and tied the mare to the nearest post with the unhurried movements of someone who has made a decision and has moved past the part of the process where fear is the primary variable. 6 men outside, positioned the way men position themselves when they are guarding something rather than simply present. The largest structure with its door closed. The door was the important detail. Chase was inside. She understood this now that she was close enough to see clearly. Not tied to a post in the open. That had been her first assumption from the ridge. A dark figure near the entrance, visible in the gray light. But held inside, where Vane would want him, where the document would be. Where the conversation Vane needed to have could happen without an audience. "Stop there," one of the outside men said. She stopped. Let them look at her for a moment. Let the confusion do its work. "I need to speak with Colonel Vane," she said. The voice her father had given her for the moments when a room needed to hear you, when the truth of what you were saying needed to arrive before the words did. Confused looks exchanged. She let them be exchanged. "I know he's here," she said. "Tell him Eliza Hart is here, and that she has documentation she's prepared to use publicly, and that he has approximately 1 minute to decide what he wants to do about that." More exchanged looks. One man moved toward the door. Then Vane appeared in the doorway. He looked for the first time since she had seen him like a man whose night had not gone the way he planned it. His coat was still pressed, his silver hair still neat. But something behind his eyes was working at a calculation that wasn't producing satisfying results, and the working of it showed in a way he couldn't entirely suppress. "Mrs. Chase," he said. "Colonel Vane," she said. He looked at the sash. Something moved in his face that he didn't quite manage to keep still. She filed it away. "Come inside," he said. "We can discuss this more." "Here is fine," she said. "Here is fine." The same words she had used outside the hotel in San Cristo. She wanted him to hear the echo. She wanted him to understand she had been the same person in that conversation as she was in this one, and the location had changed nothing about who she was or what she intended to do. He stepped down from the doorway. 4 of his men shifted their positions behind him. "The document you claim to have," he said, "is federal property removed without authorization. The document is evidence of a plan to defraud a treaty-protected band of their land in order to facilitate an unauthorized mineral extraction." She watched his face as she said it, the way her father had taught her to watch a congregation when he said something true. You could always tell by the face whether the truth had landed. "I've been practicing the exact language. I want to have it right when I say it in front of the territorial governor's representative, which will be shortly." His jaw tightened. The composed surface held but at greater cost now. "You are one young woman," he said, "with no legal standing in this territory. I am the legally documented wife of the band's leader," she said. "I am a citizen of the United States. I am an eyewitness to 6 weeks of treaty compliance. That directly contradicts the case you've been constructing. And I provided a reproduced copy of your surveying order to Sheriff Wade Briggs of San Cristo County 4 days ago, which he has already forwarded to the territorial governor's office with his own written account." She held his gaze without moving it. "The original document is on my person, which makes the case complete. How many of those legal standings would you like me to continue listing?" The silence was the kind that precedes a significant and unwelcome shift. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her shoulder at the desert, at the ridgeline. She watched his eyes move across it, searching. Reed was very good at his job. There was nothing on that ridge to see. "You came alone," Vane said. "I came alone," she confirmed, which was technically accurate at the precise moment she said it. He reached into his coat. The world went very quiet and very specific all at once. She did not move. Every instinct developed over 6 weeks of desert living said adapt, move, react. But she was thinking clearly enough to know that stillness was correct here, that she was safer in it, that a man like Vane, who had built his career entirely on the appearance of civilization and the mechanics of legality, was not going to shoot an unarmed woman in an open mining camp at dawn in front of 8 witnesses. He was not that kind of man. He was the kind who arranged, who wrote letters, who paid others to carry out the parts that left visible marks and ensured he was far enough removed that the marks couldn't be traced back. His hand came out of his coat, holding a pen, and beneath the pen, flat against his palm, a document. Official paper. The size and weight of it recognizable. "Your husband," Vane said, "was about to sign this when you arrived." Her heart turned over. She kept her face still. "I don't believe you," she said. "He had reason to cooperate," Vane said. "He was informed you hadn't made it out of the attack on the camp." The world narrowed to a specific point. Not fear exactly. Something that existed on the other side of fear's border. Something that happened when everything you were holding together suddenly pulled toward a single direction all at once. She understood the calculation immediately. If Chase believed she was dead, the treaty was dead with her, because she was the witness, and without her, the treaty was words without weight. And if the treaty was already broken, in practice, then there was nothing left to protect by refusing to sign. And the only remaining question was what signing might buy. Time, safety, the smallest possible reduction in damage from what followed. He had been about to give up everything to protect what remained of something he believed was already gone. Because of her. She looked at Vane. "Let me see him," she said. Vane studied her for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Calculation, assessment, the checking of angles. Then he stepped back from the doorway and gestured for her to enter. The interior of the structure was dim, the walls stone and the light coming through 2 small windows in strips. A table, 2 chairs, a lantern burning low. Chase sat in one of the chairs. His wrists had been bound to the chair arms with rope, held in place rather than mobile, Vane's version of control that preserved the appearance of a negotiation rather than a captivity. A cut above his left temple had been roughly cleaned, but was still angry and recent. The document was on the table in front of him, weighted at the corners. The pen Vane had been carrying was its pair. His head came up when she entered. He had heard the voice outside. He knew the voice. But the knowing and the believing were not connecting the way they should, because the last information he had received about Eliza Hart had been delivered with the specific, careful gentleness reserved for irreversible news. She hadn't made it out. He had been sitting with that information since before midnight. He had been sitting with it, and the document and the calculation that kept returning, no matter how many times he ran the others. If she is gone, then what exactly am I holding this line for? He had been reaching for the pen, and then he had heard her voice outside, and then she walked through the door. She was real. Torn blue dress, scrapes on both hands, hair loose from whatever she'd done with it the day before, and across her left shoulder, lying against the torn blue fabric, as though it had always belonged there, and had simply been waiting to be placed. Crimson and gold. Chase looked at the sash, and then at her face, and then at the sash again, and the pen that had been within reach of his bound hand was suddenly beside the point entirely. She crossed the distance between them without running. Because she understood, in the way she understood things now, that how she crossed this distance mattered. That she was being watched by Vane and his men, and by whatever Reed was doing on the ridge above. That she needed to cross it like a woman who has made her choice, and is not uncertain about what it cost, and is not asking anyone's permission to have made it. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her face, at the sash, at all the things in her face that he had been learning to read for 6 weeks, and that were now saying something completely clear, in a language he had no trouble understanding. "You opened it," he said. "I opened it," she said. A pause, the weight of it between them. "And," he said, "and I chose you." She held his gaze without moving it. Not the treaty. Not because I was out of options, or the road back to Missouri looked too long. Not from duty or fear or exhaustion. She looked at him steadily. "You. That's what I'm saying. That's what's in front of you." Something happened in his face that she had not seen before in 6 weeks of careful observation. It was too open, too unguarded. Like something that had been held carefully in a fixed position for a very long time, had simply, finally, been allowed to be in a different one. Like a door coming off hinges that had been stiff. So long the door had forgotten it was supposed to move. He said nothing, which was, from him, more than anything words could have carried. From outside, the sound she had been waiting for. Hooves. Not one set. Many. Coming fast and without any pretense of being quiet, which meant Reed had counted to 1 minute and 40 seconds, and had not been willing to wait a moment longer than that. Reed came through the door, like weather arriving without warning. 4 warriors with him into the structure, 2 more taking the outside, moving with the absolute economy of people who have been waiting for a specific signal and are very ready to act on it. The men inside scattered. Not all of them held their ground, and the ones who didn't made the only sensible choice available to them. Vane stepped back against the far wall. Eliza pulled the knife from her boot, the one she had put there that morning before she rode toward the rally point, because 6 weeks in the desert had taught her to prepare for things she hoped wouldn't need to happen. And cut Chase's ropes in 2 deliberate passes. The rope was good quality, it needed both passes. He flexed his hands, rose, slightly unsteady for a moment, the blood returning properly to his arms, the cut at his temple pulling as he moved his head. He looked at her hands, at the knife in them. "You had that the whole time," he said. "Yes," she said. "When you were standing in front of Vane, yes." He looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was resolving itself from several possibilities into one. "You are," he said, "the most unexpected woman I have ever encountered." "I'll accept that," she said. Vane tried to ride. He got approximately 30 yards before Reed's horse cut him off, with the efficient precision of a very experienced rider on a horse that had performed this particular maneuver before, and found it well within its capabilities. Vane pulled up, looked at the warriors surrounding him. Did the mathematics that a practical man does when the variables have shifted decisively against him. He dismounted. Sheriff Briggs arrived 2 hours later, which was not cinematically ideal in terms of timing, but was entirely logical, given that Silver Fox had arranged his notification through the older settler who lived near the canyon edge. A man who had been quietly decent to the band for years without making announcements about it, who had ridden to San Cristo in the dark and delivered the message and let Briggs make his own determination. Briggs had known immediately what to do with it. He read the original document, the one Eliza had kept pressed against her Bible since the morning she found it falling from between the flour sacks, the one she had kept safe through the attack and the desert night and the ride north. With the same careful attention he'd given the reproduced copy 4 days earlier. Then he read it again. He looked at Vane. He looked at Eliza. He shook his head in the way of a man who had hoped things were not quite as complicated as they appeared, and has now confirmed that they are precisely that complicated, and has decided to deal with it regardless. "Lanane," he said, "I'm placing you under arrest pending contact with the territorial authority. I'd encourage you to come along without incident." A pause that was not quite a threat but was adjacent to one. "For reasons that should be apparent to a man in your position." Vane looked once at Eliza. The composure was intact but thin now, like a layer of ice in early spring that will hold if you don't press it, but has already made its decision about the future. The calculating expression was gone from his eyes. What replaced it was harder to name, recognition maybe. Or simply, the acknowledgement that a particular version of events had failed to materialize, and that the version that had materialized instead was one he would need to manage from a considerably weaker position. He went quietly. The ride back to the canyon took most of the morning. Eliza rode beside Chase. He had declined any suggestion of a litter, which was predictable, and had accepted a slower pace, which was concession enough from a man who did not typically acknowledge difficulty, unless the difficulty was severe enough to make acknowledgement unavoidable. Reed rode on his other side, the 3 of them in a line, as the desert moved from pre-dawn gray through gold and into the full burning clarity of a morning that had no interest in being subtle about its intentions. After a while, Reed said, "The Missouri woman went and found you." Chase looked at him. "She did," he said. Reed considered this for a moment, with a knife she had in her boot the whole time. Apparently, Reed looked across Chase at Eliza. His face was doing the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency in recent weeks. The expression underneath his usual expression, the one that had been slowly making its way to the surface as the evidence in its favor accumulated. Warmth that was real, precisely because it had been reluctant. Trust that meant something because it had been withheld long enough to be sure. "Still strange," he said, "for Missouri." "You've said that before," she said. "Still holds," he said, but he was smiling. The full version, not the partial one she'd been counting. Both sides of it aimed directly at her. She counted it. Of course she did. The camp was damaged, not destroyed. That was what she understood when they rode back into the canyon. The eastern lodges had burned, 3 of them. The frames reduced to charred timber and ash. Some stores lost. 2 horses still unaccounted for. Several warriors with injuries that needed proper attention before anything else. But the people were there. The families who had scattered in the attack had found each other through the night, following the pre-agreed routes Chase had established, gathering at the points he had designated. The children who had gone silent with fear were making noise again, which was the most reliable sign she had learned of a community's recovery. The older women were already assessing the damage with the practical efficiency of people who have survived difficult things before and understand that the first order of business is always, what do we have? What do we need? What do we do next? Silver Fox stood at the center of the camp. She watched Eliza ride in, watched her dismount, looked at the sash for a long moment. Then she made a sound, low, approving. Not the quarter-inch crack of the first weeks, something much wider than that. Something that had been waiting for this particular piece of evidence before it would open fully. The rebuilding took 10 days. Eliza worked alongside everyone else without any expectation of acknowledgement for what she had done at the mining camp. She carried water and mended hides and helped relay the mud brick of the north wall that had crumbled in the attack's aftermath. She made corn mash badly for 3 days running, and then on the 4th day she made it correctly. And Silver Fox ate a full bowl without commenting, which was, she'd come to understand, a form of praise more sincere than any words the old woman could have offered. Her hands looked nothing like Missouri hands. She thought about that sometimes. About what you leave behind you when you go somewhere new and what turns out to travel with you regardless, and where exactly the line was between the two. She thought her father would have had something to say about it. He usually had something to say about transformations. She thought he would have been pleased. She was almost certain of it. On the 11th day, Chase came to her lodge in the evening. He had something in his hand, something small, and she couldn't see what it was in the low light before he sat down across from her with the fire between them and the canyon walls going purple and dark above. He opened his hand, a pendant, silver, small, shaped like a bird in flight, the wings not perfectly symmetrical, one a fraction higher than the other, as though the bird had been caught mid-adjustment, deciding its direction. The metal was uneven in a way that was not imperfection but craft, the mark of something made by hand, by someone who cared more about the thing being right than about it being quick. She took it, turned it over. "What is this from?" she said. "The lock," he said, "from the box." She looked up at him. "I melted it down," he said, "and shaped something else from it." She looked back at the bird, at the slight asymmetry of the wings, at the warmth the metal had already taken from his hand. "Because locks," she said slowly. "Locks keep things closed," he said. "Your heart opened mine. I didn't want to keep the lock." She held the pendant. She had words for this. She was her father's daughter, and she had always had words, for meaning, for gratitude, for the specific texture of being given something you needed before you knew you needed it. She could have articulated exactly what this small silver bird meant to her and what it cost him to get it, and what the making of it said about who he was. She didn't say any of it. She leaned forward and placed her free hand over his, where it rested on his knee, his hand under hers. He turned his hand over, held hers. They sat like that in the firelight, while the canyon went fully dark above them, and the stars came out one at a time in the desert sky, and the fire crackled low between them. "Chase," she said, after a while. "Yes, will you put it on?" He took the pendant from her. His fingers worked the clasp with the same careful attention he gave to everything he considered worth doing properly. He reached forward, and she felt his hands at the back of her neck, and then the silver bird was at the base of her throat, catching the firelight. He looked at her. "It suits you," he said. "Does it?" "You look like someone who has found the place where they land," he said. After a long flight, she touched the pendant with one finger. She thought, yes, that was exactly what it felt like. Not an ending. Not an arrival at a destination she had been aiming for all along. Just the moment when you realize your wings have folded and the ground is solid beneath you, and you are, improbably and completely, exactly where you're meant to be. The letter from the territorial governor arrived 17 days after the attack. Briggs brought it himself. He rode out to the canyon on a Tuesday morning. She noticed it was Tuesday the way she noticed all the days now, which was to say she noticed them without needing to count them. With the envelope in his breast pocket, and his hat in his hands, and the expression of a man who has delivered enough news in his life to know it should be delivered while standing still, he gave it to Chase first. Chase read it, then passed it. To Eliza she read it. Government language, careful and hedged, and full of the qualifications that official documents use when they want to say something significant without committing to the full weight of it. But underneath all the hedging, the substance was clear. Colonel Aldous Vane had been relieved of his position, effective immediately, pending formal investigation by the Department of the Interior. The geological survey of lands covered under the existing treaty had been suspended indefinitely. The treaty provisions were confirmed as binding and in full effect. The band's occupation of the canyon and surrounding territory was to be honored per the original terms. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it against her chest, in the place where her father's Bible usually was. Briggs looked at the canyon, at the lodges, some of them rebuilt now, and some still showing the marks of what had happened. At the women near the creek, at the children who had stopped to examine him with the frank curiosity of children who have decided something is interesting. I owe you both an apology, he said, to Chase first, then to Eliza, for not moving faster when I had reason to. Chase looked at him. You moved, Chase said, when it mattered. That's what counts. Briggs nodded. He looked at the ground for a moment and then back up. I'd like to come back. Regularly. Bring some of the ranchers who aren't Murphy. Start some conversations that should have started a long time ago. Chase held out his hand. Briggs shook it, and something in his face just for a moment looked like relief. The celebration that night was the largest the canyon had seen since Eliza had arrived. Fires across the full width of the valley floor. Drums she felt in her sternum before her ears made sense of the sound. Dancing that Silver Fox pulled her into without asking. The old woman's hand at her back. Silver Fox's feet knowing every step while Eliza made something that wasn't quite the right dance, but was entirely and completely her own, which the people around her seemed to find acceptable. Reed found her at the fire's edge later. He stood beside her, looking at the flames rather than at her. In the firelight his face was its own landscape. Strong jaw, eyes that held everything behind them with a stubbornness she had come to understand. Was not hardness but protection of something he considered worth protecting. You should know, he said after a moment, choosing words with the care of someone who doesn't use many and wants the ones he does to land correctly. When I thought you might not have gotten out of the camp, I was going to look for you before going after him. He paused. I thought you should know that. She looked at him. Reed, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. He turned back to the fire. Was quiet for a moment that had something in it. Then he said something in Apache. She recognized 3 of the words. She had been adding words, steadily, daily, and she knew enough of the shape of the sentence to understand what kind of thing it was saying, even without the full meaning. What does the rest of it mean, she asked. He almost smiled. The full version, both sides, aimed directly at her for the first time. It means, he said, that you ride beside him, not behind. Something expanded in her chest. Will you say it again sometime? She said, when Chase can translate it properly. He'll say it himself, Reed said. Give him a few days. He walked back into the firelight. She found Chase at the canyon's edge later, standing at the high point they had stood before, looking out over the desert below where the celebration fires made small gold constellations against the dark. She stood beside him. The night was warm. The stars were fully out, the whole abundance of them, unimpeded by anything between her and the sky. What are you thinking about? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. My mother, he said. She used to stand at a place like this. She told me once that she looked at the same stars and thought about 2 places at once for a long time. And then one day she looked at them and only thought about one. When did that happen for her? Eliza asked. She said she didn't notice when it happened, only that one day it had. Eliza looked at the stars. Chase, she said. Yes, I have a letter from my aunt. She had been carrying it for 3 days tucked into her Bible. It arrived with the supply man. I haven't opened it. He looked at her. Not the question of whether she should open it. Just looking. I know what it says, she said. Miriam is practical. She'll be offering a solution. A way back with as little damage as possible. She'll have thought it through and worked out the details. She looked at the letter in her hands in the firelight. She's not wrong to offer, She's being a good aunt. She looked at the pendant at her throat, at the fires below in the valley, at Reed, visible from here, standing with two of the warriors near the largest fire, his head thrown back in laughter at something. She looked at the canyon walls, which had gone from red to purple, to the deep blue-black of full night, the colors she now knew by heart. She folded Miriam's letter, pressed it between her palms for a moment. Then she opened the front cover of her Bible, found the page where the letter from Miriam that she'd received at the train station was still tucked, unread, the one Miriam had pressed into her hand at the last moment and said, "Read it when you need it." Not before. She had been carrying it since Missouri without opening it. She opened it now. Clara. Miriam had started, then crossed it out and written above, "Eliza, forgive the crossing out. I keep writing the name you almost became instead of the one you chose. I don't know what you'll find out there. I don't know if it will be good or hard, or some combination that doesn't have a name yet. Probably the combination. But I know you. You were always the one who looked out the window instead of at the floor. You were always the one who answered the letters from strangers. You were always the one who looked up, so look up, Eliza, whatever you find. Look up, your Aunt Miriam." She read it twice. She thought about a kitchen table in Missouri with a newspaper and 3 red circles, and a woman who was practical enough to note that far isn't the worst thing and honest enough to say so. She folded both letters together carefully and placed them back inside the Bible, next to each other, which seemed right. She turned to Chase. He was watching her. He had been watching her read. He didn't look away when she looked at him. "She told me to look up," Eliza said. And he said. She looked up, at the stars, at the canyon walls, at his face in the firelight, the scar on his jaw, and the copper beads, and the storm-gray eyes. She had been learning to read for 2 months, and expected to spend considerably longer still learning. "I am," she said. He reached out and took her hand, not helping her down from something, not the careful, purposeful contact of a teacher or a protector, just her hand in his. "The way you hold something you've decided is worth holding." "I know," he said. Below them, the desert stretched in every direction, ancient and indifferent and beautiful in the absolute way of things that have been here long enough to have stopped needing to justify their existence to anyone. The wind moved through the canyon walls with the patient certainty of something that knows exactly where it's going and has never been in a hurry to get there. And Eliza Hart of Missouri, who had come west on a Tuesday with a carpet bag and a Bible and $43 of other people's debt, and the faint, hopeful idea of a steady man with kind eyes, stood on a cliff above the Arizona desert in a torn blue dress with a crimson sash and a silver bird at her throat, and felt for the first time in as long as she could remember exactly like herself, not the girl from Missouri, not the frightened bride who had stepped off the train into the heat and the silence and the rearranging of everything she thought she knew. Not the woman who had been trying to survive in a world that kept shifting without asking her permission. Just herself, which was, it turned out, exactly enough. The wind moved through the canyon, the fires burned below, and somewhere in the dark the desert breathed. End of Part 3. End of The White Dove of San Cristo.